Yeah, you can have your preference, and you can have a racist preference. You can have a sexist preference. You can have a homophobic or a fatphobic preference. And you can have a colorist preference. And so some of my favorite examples, I don't know why I'm just like really giddy today. Thank y'all for bearing with me. It's like the teacher. I use the school teacher example. If you go to class on the first day of school, let's say you're a black person, or you're maybe Chinese American or Mexican American, or you're African American, and you go to class on the first day and your teacher is like, oh hello, I usually prefer to teach white students. Don't get me wrong, I'm not racist. I have nothing against you people. I just prefer not to teach people like you. I just prefer when my class is all white. Or if you can imagine a neighbor, let's say you move into a neighborhood, you move to, let's say, Springfield, Illinois. I've been there. And your neighbor, comes over to bring you cookies, and when you go to the door in your dark brown skin or your medium brown skin or your ethnically ambiguous featured skin, and they look shocked, like, oh my gosh, you people are really nice, don't get me wrong. I just prefer to have white neighbors. It's just a preference I have. I don't hate Mexicans. I don't hate Chinese people. I don't hate black people. I just, don't like to live by them. I just don't like to have y'all in my neighborhood. I just really feel more comfortable and at ease with white neighbors. It's just a preference thing. It's just my preference. Hey YouTube, thank you for tuning in to watch the replay of my weekly Instagram Live. I'm Dr. Sarah Webb, author, speaker, consultant, and coach who's known around the world as an expert on colorism. Check the description box below if you'd like to dive deeper. All the links are there. Now, if something you hear today resonates deep within your soul, or if you just like it or find it funny, make sure you hit the like button. It's like a virtual high five. And if you'd like to see more videos, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Much love. Hello, everyone. I just got really excited going live. This is the weekly live stream with yours truly, Dr. Sarah L. Webb. I do these every Monday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And we discuss all things colorism and all things related to colorism. So I've been expanding things recently. Past couple of weeks, I got a little bit more personal. And so I texted my sister. I was like, I'm done being vulnerable till 2062. And so now I'm going back to my more analytical, social commentary kinds of content. And tonight's conversation is about, one, preference is socially conditioned. But two, why that's important. So that's going to be the topic today. I think I'm going to pin that. Preference is socially conditioned. That way when people come in late, they know what I'm talking about. Yes. All right. Pin comment. Yay. So y'all know how I like to do. I like interactive lives. If you have questions or comments throughout the live, please feel free to ask them and say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. Hey, Black Knight 0626.2. You are magnificent as well. Welcome everybody. We'll get started in just a second. I do have a few announcements that I'd like to share. One is that my monthly support groups are underway, and so I have the next one at next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a support group for dark-skinned Black women specifically. I have other support groups and coaching programs, individual coaching programs. If you're curious about any of that, you can email me at sarah@colorismhealing.com. And as of maybe 5 minutes ago, I added a button on my profile page for booking free info sessions with me. So that's if you're curious about the monthly support groups or one-on-one coaching or bringing me in to speak or just anything really. And those info sessions are complimentary. The other thing, I have some books that I've been publishing. So I just have this massive creativity in me, so I just have to create stuff. And so I have my children's coloring book, yes, per the request of my sister, who has 2 children under the age of 10. And then I also have the Colorism Healing Workbook, which I created in 2018. I just updated the cover this year. So those are 2 things that you can get. If you look at my profile page on the highlight section, there's a highlight for books, and the links are in that highlight. So those are my big announcements, y'all. I'm having so much fun in New York City, in Harlem specifically. So check out my Instagram reels if you haven't. I'm having a really good day. And this is a great way to end my day. And it doesn't feel like it's ending because it's still light outside, but y'all know, daylight savings time. So let's see, before I jump into the topic, who have I missed saying hello to? We have Bentake. Hi, I am watching from the Gambia. Woo woo. I was like, every week, I'm so grateful because every week I have one of my international family join the live stream, and it's amazing to me because I know if it's 7 p.m. where I am, it's really late where the rest of my fam is across the globe. So I appreciate y'all. You night owls, maybe suffering from a bout of insomnia, I'm happy to be a source of entertainment for you across the globe. I'm from the Gambia, but living in Turkey at the moment. Well, that is excellent. Cool. I've never been to Turkey. Let me know if you recommend it as a place to visit, as well as the Gambia. All right, so let's get started. If you just joining, you can see through the pinned comment that our topic is that preference is socially conditioned. But I also want to talk about why that's important. So we've had this conversation before. Many of you are new to my page. Most of my followers are relatively new, but if you have had a chance to look at my archives, or if you have been around for a while, you know that I've talked about the preference question before in the past. And so I'm going to cite some of that stuff. I'm going to, look back and review some of the preference versus prejudice content that I posted, been posting for a few years now, but just continuing to reference it because it continues to be relevant. But then I also want to talk about why that matters and what we can do with that information. And so the first thing I'll say is that I actually, over the years, have realized that the word preference in and of itself is not inherently wrong. It's not inherently bad. And where I push back is when people say it's just a preference. And I've even made TikToks about this. It's all so fun. And so the assumption is that because it's just a preference, we shouldn't care. We shouldn't be bothered by people's innocent preferences, right? So there's an assumption that the preference is, because it's a preference, it's inherently innocent and it's benign. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's just natural. It's neutral. It's not hate. It's just a preference. And so I've been saying more recently that, you can have your preference and you can have a racist preference. You can have a sexist preference. You can have a homophobic or a fatphobic preference. And you can have a colorist preference. And so my thinking has been, when people are racist, for example, a lot of times they don't feel themselves as racist. A lot of times it feels like a preference. When you think about people who are sexist or people who have these religious beliefs that say they can't make wedding cakes for gay couples, right? It's like, it's a preference. I don't hate you. So to the people who have those biases, they don't feel it as hatred either. To them, it feels like a preference. And so I think just because you don't perceive it as hate doesn't mean your preference is innocent. And so some of my favorite examples, I don't know why I'm just like really giddy today. Thank y'all for bearing with me. It's like the teacher. I use the school teacher example. If you go to class on the first day of school, let's say you're a black person, or you're maybe Chinese American or Mexican American, or you're African American, and you go to class on the first day and your teacher is like, oh hello, I usually prefer to teach white students. don't get me wrong, I'm not racist. I have nothing against you people. I just prefer not to teach people like you. I just prefer when my class is all white. Or if you can imagine a neighbor, let's say you move into a neighborhood, you move to, let's say, Springfield, Illinois. I've been there. And your neighbor, comes over to bring you cookies, and when you go to the door in your dark brown skin or your medium brown skin or your ethnically ambiguous featured skin, and they look shocked. They're like, oh my gosh, you people are really nice, don't get me wrong. I just prefer to have white neighbors. It's just a preference I have. I don't hate Mexicans. I don't hate Chinese people. I don't hate black people. I just, don't like to live by them. I just don't like to have y'all in my neighborhood. I just really feel more comfortable and at ease with white neighbors. It's just a preference thing. It's just my preference. So my thing is, okay, we can claim that anything is a preference. You can claim that anything under the sun is a preference. There are people who have committed mass genocide. They preferred to get rid of an entire ethnic group, right? You think about Hitler and his Nazi regime. He preferred not to have Jewish people on the planet. That was his preference. Okay, so use the word preference all you want to. My thing is, don't think that because it's a preference, it's innocent or benign or that it's not just as harmful. And you can also gauge whether or not it's a preference. So again, going back to just quickly review in case you haven't heard my preference breakdown. You can also gauge a preference based on the degree to which you have to disparage everything that's not that preference, right? And if it's a preference, you can't really, how can you predetermine, right, an innocent, benign preference when you have not actually seen the person? How do you actually know you would prefer a lighter skinned person that you have never met? The preferences are all hypothetical. They're all used in the hypothetical sense. Oh, I don't date dark skinned girls. Really? Because you haven't met every dark skinned girl or dark skinned guy or whoever you date, right? So there are, lots of content in the archives if you really want to dive deeper. But so for me, I stopped arguing with people about whether or not it's quote unquote a preference. And I'm like, sure, it's a preference, but it's a colorist preference at the end of the day. Like you can hold on to that word preference, but it ain't the innocent, random thing that you think it is. And speaking of random, that brings me to my point about preferences being conditioned. And here's something that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge or refuse to acknowledge when they talk about their preferences, is they think a preference is just random, like a coin toss. You're just as likely to prefer chocolate ice cream as you are to prefer vanilla ice cream, right? They think their preferences are just a coin toss, just the reaching your hand into a jar and you pull out the short straw, you pull out the long straw, whatever. But most, if not all, of our preferences as humans are conditioned. And here's what let me break that down, because I think people might have a hard time following me when it comes to that. So one, even if you were not explicitly conditioned to something, it's likely that your parents or your ancestors were conditioned for that thing. It's called evolution. And there have been lots of scientific research studies that show that people who experience some form of conditioning will pass that on to their offspring for generations to come. And it's called epigenetic memory. So if your great-great-grandparent was conditioned to have an allergic reaction to sunshine, that's something that they can pass down to their great-grandchildren. And so you might think, well, I was just born liking this thing or disliking this thing. And even if that's the case, it's still a reaction to some type of conditioning, and it doesn't have to be that way, right? So I first learned of this concept of conditioning in my college psychology class, intro to psychology class. It's called classical conditioning. And so what conditioning is, because also I think maybe when we're saying preferences can be conditioned, I don't want to assume that everyone even knows what that means, right? Like, what are you talking about? So conditioning is when we learn to associate one thing with something else that's not actually related to that thing. So two unrelated things become associated with each other in our minds. That's conditioning. In the terms of preference, when we're talking about preference, right? And so that concept started to take shape with, I don't know the exact date, but they were doing a study on dogs. So all animals, including human animals, are subject to this. So the dogs were conditioned, aka trained, conditioned, to associate the sound of a bell, like just ringing a bell, with food. And so every time those dogs heard a bell, they would start to salivate as if there was food in the room, as if they were about to eat. Okay? And there's nothing inherent about a bell that would make dogs salivate. They could have used bird songs. They could have used fingers across a chalkboard. The way it's done is you repeatedly expose someone to the two things that you want them to associate at the same time over and over and over again. So if you want dogs to associate a bell with food, you constantly expose them to those two things at the same time. So every time you bring them food, you ring a bell. Bring them food, ringing the bell. Bring them food, ring the bell. Bring them food, ring the bell. And over time, they associate the bell with the food. Okay? So y'all might be like, okay, Dr. Will, like, land the plane, bring it home. What are you talking about? So when it comes to colorism and anti-blackness and, white beauty standards, the two unrelated things that we have been taught to associate are attractiveness, beauty, value, worth, with light skin, with light eyes, with straight hair, with thin noses. Because the words, the positioning of valuable has always been paired with a white person. The label of beautiful, the characterization of beautiful has always been paired simultaneously with a white person. And we talk about this in representation. So when you watch a movie, if you've watched 100 movies in your lifetime, and every one of those movies portrayed the female love interest as a white person, or as a light-skinned Latina, or as a light-skinned biracial person, you're being conditioned to associate white or light-skinned Latina or light-skinned biracial person with love. That's who the love interest is. That's what conditioning is in the context of something like colorism. And so it's not just movies that are conditioning us. It's pretty much anything in society. It could be commercials, billboards, magazines, who your friends are dating and who your friends say is beautiful, who the teachers pick to say the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning, who the cops are not interrogating. Oh, and then that's also paired, right, with the constant pairing of dark-skinned people and black people with crimes, and always associating and pairing, this robbery, and then putting up the picture of the darkened picture of a black man, right? Always pairing crime with the image of a black person. So just like the bell got associated with the food, because you keep putting those two things together, even though they're actually not related, skin tone and facial features get associated with things that they're not actually directly inherently related to, but we're subconsciously programmed to think that they are. And so you, the person watching this, who doesn't think that their preference is that big of a deal, you have been socially conditioned to associate thing one, which is beauty, with thing two, which is light-skinned. That has been your conditioning. Woo! I feel like that was a lot. I got one more thing to say about that, but I did see some comments coming through, so let me go back up. Let's see. Y'all in here deep. Okay. Watching from London. What's up, Kim Art E? Hey, oh, the color in me. You bought a badge. Thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you, Cat Rivers, for buying a badge. Let me not knock my microphone off the table. Innocent preferences. They are so tricky. Yes. Bente K, thank you for the badge. Oh, y'all buying badges tonight. Oh my gosh, I love y'all. Oh gosh. Y'all are starting to get to know me a little too well. Lucid Low says, no one ever questions if someone referred to as light skin as ugly. It became a synonym for beauty in the Black community. Yes. Oh, Lucid Lows. See, that's why I have to stop to read the comments, because what Lucid Lows is saying is that people use synonyms. They use light skin as a synonym for pretty, right? So you can hear somebody say, oh, I want pretty babies. And in the Black community, we all know what they mean when they say pretty baby. We all know they mean the lighter skin with the loose curls, or, you know, the hazel eyes, right? Like when people say, oh, I want pretty babies, in most contexts, all the other Black people in the room can imagine the child that they're imagining, right? Definitely. Khalif Graham says, I think it's okay to call it a preference as long as we understand that to prefer one thing is to like it more. As so this it a preference still means you're colorist. Yep, exactly. Conditioned and unnatural. There's a name for this study. I don't remember the name of it though. Cat River says, joining from Paris this evening. Ooh, the international folks is all up in here. Oh, and I got Paris. I don't know if you can see, like right there's an image of Paris. Not an image of Paris, but like a poster with Paris on it. So shout out to Paris. Thank you so much for all you do to shift our understanding and promote healing. Yes, it is my calling. It is my calling. Acronym TIA, trustworthy, intelligent, and attractive. Oh, a TIA. I assume you're talking about me. I don't know. Okay, cool. Thank you, Kim Arts E, for the badge. I got 4 badges. I think I said thanks to everyone. Thank y'all so much. So what I'll say too, in terms of other studies you can look at, and again, like Lucid Low says, I didn't look up the exact names of the studies because I think they're really, really widely known, and it wouldn't be hard to find them. But also Dr. Joy Degree, I don't know if I'm saying her last name right. It's Degruy. She applied a lot of these, just basic generic scientific studies and applied them specifically to African Americans. And she talks about the post-traumatic slave syndrome. And so we can think about it, in response to slavery, but also in response to colonization in general. If there wasn't, chattel slavery in your country or as part of your colonial history. But slavery was in many, many places outside of the United States as well. But thinking about just the trauma of the white violence and white genocide, right? And enslavement and, all the harm that was caused. And what these scientific studies have shown us is that just like those preferences, that conditioning can be passed down, all of that trauma and that harm is also being passed down through generations. And so even though we did not physically endure slavery, even though we're not born into slavery, we still carry the stress and the harm and the trauma and the conditioning in our DNA. And so I also say that to offer compassion for all of us who are unlearning these things, to offer compassion and patience and grace for all of us who have inherited this trauma and who have inherited the conditioning of, that we don't know where it comes from. Because on top of inheriting it, the conditioning continues. And that's the trip, right? And so Dr. Joy Degree, I'm not doing it justice. Like, it's her study, she has a book out, like she has videos on YouTube that you can watch if you don't want to read the whole book, but she has done a lot of work in explaining this. Because it's only right in this generation when Black people are even have the bandwidth to think about healing. So you think about like all of the stuff that we've endured and not even being able to like heal from it because it continued to happen. And we continue to have to be in survival mode for multiple generations. And it's only now that I'm seeing a mass movement of Black people talking about mental health, talking about wellness, talking about self-care, right? Talking about going to therapy and normalizing therapy and, you know, that kind of thing amongst us as Black people. And so that's positive. That's a positive change. But even as we start to prioritize and normalize and destigmatize mental health care and mental wellness and mental health awareness, even with that, we're still enduring racism. We're still enduring colorism. We're still enduring misogynoir, and we're still enduring sexism, and we're still enduring classism and, you know, homophobia. In fact, we're still enduring all of these traumas. But at least now we have a level of awareness that we have more meta awareness, right? Of like, okay, these things exist, and here's the agency I have in that to start to heal. So that's, I think it's really, really, like when you think about the fact that we are still alive as Black people, there's, I think, a higher purpose for all of us, for our people in particular. So here's why I think really understanding that even the most seemingly random or quote unquote innocent preferences are not actually just a coin toss, but that they were intentionally conditioned to be that, is you then can apply those same scientific principles to reprogram yourself. And that's the silver lining, is that these scientific principles of how we come to associate one thing with another thing, these scientific principles of how trauma can be passed down to other generations, the same stuff can be applied to healing. So healing can also be intergenerational. We can have intergenerational trauma, but we can also have intergenerational healing. And so everything you do to heal yourself can be passed down to future generations. And everything you do to reprogram and retrain your own brain can be passed down to future generations. And so people often ask, well, how do we do it? And my answer, I don't think it's the sexy answer. I don't think it's the silver bullet that everybody wants to hear, but you do the same thing that got you in that place, except you change the equation. So instead of constantly exposing yourselves to white people on magazines, you simply start to expose yourself to dark-skinned people on magazines, right? So the pathway to conditioning, the pathway to unlearning, is the same mechanism that you will use, that was used for you to learn it in the first place. And it's very mundane. It is as mundane as turning on the TV and pulling up your Netflix app. It is very mundane. Because I think, again, what I hear, what I intuit from people who say, what more can we do, what else can we do, is that we want something that seems a little more sensational, right? We want like a big campaign to like sort of get our adrenaline up. But real change, yes, do the campaigns. Yes, do the exciting things. Do the big productions. Do the sensational, revolutionary things. But the only real change has to be sustained in the quiet moments. The only real change has to be sustained in the mundane, everyday, boring habits. The habits, the lifestyles. And it has to be a lifestyle change. It can't just be like, oh, I'm going to go attend this exciting event and that's going to solve the problem. And I think sometimes we're trying to escape the change in the lifestyle. I think sometimes we're trying to escape the change in the daily habits by constantly looking for just the big bang or the big boom of some event or campaign or cause that's going to solve all the problems. I think humans, we who want to see global change and social change, have to be committed to the everyday habits. And now your everyday habits can be very mundane, like unsubscribing from certain platforms and choosing to subscribe to others. But it can also be, every Monday you call your local senators, right? So some of them can be more political than others. Some of them can be more everyday, mundane. Some of them can be more creative than others. Maybe one of your habits is every day you go and speak at a local elementary school, or you go and read books, or you volunteer. But it has to be habitual. It has to become part of our everyday lifestyle. That's what changes society, is all of us committing to changing our lifestyles. And I actually am excited when I think about neuroplasticity, if I can be a nerd for a second and use that word. Because again, when I think about where I am and where I have been in terms of my perceptions of myself, my perceptions of other people, my perceptions of life and what was possible for me, I realized that I was taught those things. And if I was taught those things, then they are not inherently a part of me. That anything that I was trained or conditioned or taught to do, I could be trained or conditioned to do other things. I could be taught to do and think other ways. And I say that again, the intellectual knowing is only the beginning. Then it's the actual everyday application in the practice, the daily practice of the thing that we now know. So my affirmation for you all today, I have the choice and the power to liberate my own mind. I'll say it again. You have the choice and the power to liberate your own mind. Let me see what these comments are on this. Oh, I got another badge from Lucid Loves. Oh, thank you. I got a great gang here. Let's see. Did I miss? Oh, Pavlov's experiment. Yeah, dropped gem. Dropped gem. I love these screen names. Thank y'all for tuning in, because I just like reading y'all screen names sometimes. Y'all, a lot of y'all have really cool screen names to read. Dropped gem. It is Pavlov's experiment. No, Pavlov's, what you call it? Experiment, yes. The Black church is starting to engage in conversation around mental health as holistic ministry. Absolutely. Yeah, that's so good to see, because we all know that the Black church has a history of sort of being dismissive of professional therapists, and being dismissive of seeking psychiatric help, or being dismissive of taking medication to help you manage like bipolar disorder or depression. And I think that I am seeing change. We're seeing change. We're seeing people, reconsider those things. And there are more mental health professionals being vocal in church and like taking leadership roles in churches, and preachers becoming, therapists are former therapists becoming preachers and things like that. So I think that's going to be important, is to know that faith in God, or faith in divine or a higher power, doesn't negate or exclude also seeking professional help. All right. Yes. That is great advice. I have a lifetime of learning, unlearning, and relearning. We all do. Okay, Ray? We all do. And that's what I love about it, is that we don't necessarily have to like compare ourselves or compete with each other, because anybody that you can name who's still alive still has something to learn. And so yes, some people know more than others about certain things. Yes, some people are actively trying to learn. Okay, we'll say that there are people who are actively trying to stay oblivious, who actively want to stay ignorant. And I think that's the difference, is that we all have more to learn, we all have more to unlearn. But I prefer people who are actively trying to learn. I prefer people who are actively trying to do the work. I own my preferences. I do own them. I own my preferences for people who are actively trying to do the work over people who refuse to learn and grow and self-evaluate and self-reflect. Yeah, like those ain't my people. All right. Let's see. I have the choice and the power to liberate my own mind. Yes. I'm not going to try to say your screen name. But I like all the Z's and the V's and the Z's and the V's. Yes. Khalif Graham, I think it starts with a lot of us admitting to ourselves that we are anti-Black and hate Blackness. Doing so will call us on claiming to be pro-Black, yet not seeing Black as beautiful. Khalif Graham, yes. Definitely. A lot of, I see that too. Like, I say you can't, why are you claiming pro-Blackness when you don't like dark-skinned people? You telling people not to wear their natural hair to work. But yet you say you love Black people. I know. Controversial. I've been there, done that. And even I think, like, those of us who don't want to be anti-Black still have to face the subconscious programming that is anti-Black. Because I think some people struggle with their conscious ideas versus their subconscious programming. And I think that's an important part of the conversation for humans. And that could be, with anything. Definitely with colorism, definitely with anti-Blackness, definitely with featureism and texturism and sizeism and ageism. We can all consciously say, I want to, like, my conscious wants to love Black people. But if you aren't willing to do that subconscious work, that inner work, that reprogramming of your subconscious, right, where we've all been conditioned, then your actions and your behaviors are not going to align with what you consciously say you want to do and who you want to be. But yeah, see, can a dark-skinned Black woman be a preference? Or is it an oxymoron because light skin is the standard of beauty? Ooh, listen, Lowe's, you asked a great question. Now I can't wrap up without answering this question, because this is a good question, Lucid Lowe's. And a lot of people use that scenario to claim reverse colorism. Okay? So yes, people can have a preference for dark-skinned Black women. And you can intentionally choose that preference. There are people who intentionally choose to prefer dark-skinned Black women because of what you're saying. They see the way they were previously conditioned to think dark-skinned women were unattractive, or they see the way society has stigmatized and ostracized and alienated dark-skinned women. So they consciously choose dark-skinned women. Like, they make that conscious choice. But one of the differences is that they are willing to admit that. They're willing to admit that they're making the conscious choice to prefer dark-skinned women. Whereas a lot of folks who claim the just a preference thing, they are making it seem as if they were just born that way. Like, they just woke up one day and I don't know why. I just can't explain it. They must just inherently be more attractive because they're the ones I'm attracted to, right? So there's this denial and this lack of awareness from most people who say that it's just a preference when they prefer to date light-skinned women, versus the people who often say they prefer dark-skinned women. Now, I'm saying that not everyone is fully aware, right? Because you will have some people say, I don't know, I just like chocolate women. I don't know why. But that can be taught. I know people who have told stories of growing up in families where their families taught them to love dark skin. Like, seriously, it's a conditioned thing. But again, it's I had a point. I think I just lost it. It's right on the tip of my tongue. What was I going to say? I had it. Oh, okay. Maybe it'll come to me. Let me read some more comments. Come back to me. Like Tony. Oh, Tony. Oh, I don't know what that is referring to. Says, yes, we must first face our inner white supremacist socialization. Absolutely. But I think Lucid Los's question is so fascinating because it can all be a preference. And you can also condition yourself to be more neutral, right? Like you can condition yourself to be just as likely to find a light-skinned person attractive as you are a dark-skinned person attractive. But you can also condition yourself to be more likely to find dark-skinned people attractive, right? And the reason here, I got it, y'all, I got it. I remember what I was going to say. So the thing about it is that if all the preferences are conditioned, right? Let's just say they're all conditioned. The problem is the preference for lighter skin is complicit and in support of a violent power structure. That's what I wanted to say. And that's why it's not the same. It's not reverse colorism. It's not the same when people say, oh, I prefer darker skin. Because they are doing that in a way to resist a history of violence against those people. They're doing that to overcome and to compensate for and to rectify and to bring justice to that legacy of violence and oppression that those people have faced. Versus the ones who say, oh, I just prefer light skin, or I prefer, mixed race women, or I prefer non-black women, right? Like those preferences are upholding and reinforcing state-sanctioned violence. And those kinds of preferences are upholding and supporting income inequality and wealth inequality and healthcare inequality, right? And so there is danger in upholding the preference for whiteness. And having or training yourself to have a preference for blackness in any form, any way, shape, or form, is one way to bring justice. It's to find justice. It's to rectify all that legacy of harm. So it's like affirmative action by way of preference. Affirmative action by way of preference. Because we do have a lot of ground to cover in terms of making society equitable. That's how I see it. I see when people say they have a preference for dark skin, I liken it to affirmative action, in that it's not taking anything away from light-skinned women, but it's creating space and bringing justice to a group of women or people who have not been given access to certain opportunities and certain experiences. So that's what I wanted to say, is that yes, it's still a preference, and it can still be conditioned and taught either consciously or unconsciously. But one preference is continuing to perpetuate a history of violence, and another preference is meant to bring justice to that history of violence. Yeah. Because you'll hear people say, well, it's not fair, for someone to say they don't want to date me just because I'm light-skinned, or they don't want to hire me, or they don't want to put me on their magazine cover, or, because I'm black too. And I shouldn't use that voice because that sounds infantilizing, but those people completely understand affirmative action and how choosing to hire a minority is not taking anything away from white people because of the history. And that's why I always say you have to talk about colorism in the context of history. You have to include that historical context when you're having a conversation about colorism. Because without that historical context, people get away with claiming reverse colorism because they're being ahistorical with it. That historical context makes you realize, like, no, there is no reverse colorism, because there has never been a point in history, in the Western world where darker skinned people were elevated and promoted and valued above light skinned people. Never, ever. And there has never been a period in the history of the colonized society where lighter skinned people have been hated en masse and denied and kept out of opportunities that were given and created and reserved for dark-skinned people instead. That's just not part of the history. And that's why there's no such thing as reverse colorism. All right. I went a little longer, went a little over some things. But your affirmation. I have the choice and the power to liberate my own mind. Yeah, I love that the human brain is malleable. The danger in that is if the human brain is left in the wrong hands. But in the right hands, in your well-intentioned hands, the malleability of your brain can help you to unlearn all of that stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I would say I don't even set the expectation that I'm going to learn everything in this lifetime. I don't even set that expectation for myself. I'm just like, just keep learning. Just keep learning. And when I die, there will still be stuff that I could have learned that I didn't. But I'll die knowing that I kept learning as much as I could. Oh my gosh. I love y'all so much. It is wrong that I tell colorist people that I'd rather they date or chase after their preference than settle for a darker person that likes them, whom they don't really like. Oh, is it wrong? I see what you're saying. It's kind of like wishing them to a purgatory, like a dating purgatory. Well, yeah, go ahead and chase your preference that you ain't never gonna, be satisfied with. Disrupting norms. Another screen name that I like to say, disrupting norms. My parents taught me to love dark skin explicitly. When I was a kid, they would say, look at her beautiful brown skin, or his skin was kissed by the sun. My parents were conscious and awesome. Yes, it's possible. It is so possible. And I've heard plenty of other people say the same thing, that their parents were on it. They were like intentionally, explicitly pouring into their children. And I think the goal is to just get that to happen more often, right? To like replicate that so that more and more families are doing that. Also, really quickly, I'll say, because I know that there are plenty of non-Black people who follow this page, is that non-Black people should also be teaching their children to love Blackness and to love dark skin and to love 4C hair. It's not just, Black people have to be taught to love these things. Like, all humans across the globe should be programming themselves to love Blackness, to love Black skin and Black hair textures. Let's also get into how light skin privilege is really proximity to visible racial whiteness privilege, and how colorism really functions as a means of breeding Blackness out of existence. Ooh, okay. Yes, but literally though, Khalif Graham, that was explicitly stated in a lot of cases. Like literally in the in Latin America, for example, or in the Caribbean, you have blanqueamiento la raza, or mejorando la raza. Blanqueamiento la raza literally means whitening the race. So yes, that is often an unstated intention, but it's often an explicitly stated intention as well. Historically marginalized groups, yes. Periods with an S. All right, y'all. This was fun. Thank y'all. I know I was saying earlier that I just had the most fantastic day. Just great. Like life. I'm just so happy. And I'm saying that, I'm trying to be unapologetic about saying that and about expressing how happy I am, because I think we need to see dark-skinned Black women being happy and content. So I'm saying that, and I'm like sharing parts of my life, talking about my travels and this new journey and adventure that I'm embarking on by myself, and because we need to see that. People need to be able to see that. And so I'm like, I'm not going to be quiet about my joy, because we need to see more Black joy. We need to have Black joy out loud. So I'm gonna be my joyous Black self out loud, so that people can be like, yes, there's Black joy. And when I have pain, I might share that too. I said if you weren't watching at the beginning, I was referring to my last 2 live streams and how I told my sister, I was like, I'm done being vulnerable for like the next 2 decades. No more vulnerability. It's hard. All right, folks. I love y'all so much. And the fact that y'all spent your Monday afternoon with me to talk about a very important topic, but still I appreciate you, and I can't wait to see you next week. Next week, I want to dive more into how we do some of this unlearning. So I think this was sort of laying the foundation of like what it is, giving some context. Next week, I want to talk through some more specific strategies and mindset shifts of how people can start to practice this unlearning in their everyday habits and their everyday lifestyle. So I'm excited about that. And again, I save these are recorded. So if you can't attend live or if you can't stay for the entire live, you can always go back and watch the replay. All right. Y'all enjoy the rest of your week. I know I am. Hopefully. The way I feel today, like that Earth, Wind, and Fire song, this world can't shake me the way I feel today. Come tomorrow, I'll feel the same way. Hey, get it. I'm done. I'm out. Love y'all. Bye.